Welcome back to the Live Zone Primetime on this Friday night, and we are calling all comic fans. Comictropolis is here. The nation's capital has transformed. The DC Public Library just launched a new conversation series with DC native and comic culture expert David Betancourt. It features guest stars from the comic book industry for insider discussions on comics, creative, pop culture, and what it's really like writing for Marvel and DC. The next event you see on that poster right there is next Saturday in Southwest. And the topic is one that's near and dear to David's heart. First, though, tonight, David joins us live to talk all about it. David, thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Live Zone Primetime. And for the first time ever, talking about one of your first passions. We've talked to you about baseball, we've talked to you about soccer, we've talked to you about football, and now we're finally talking comics.
My greatest love.
Yes, so Comictropolis, talk to us a little bit about what it is, how it came about, and your comic book bona fides, why you are the perfect person for this event.
Well, Comictropolis is something that myself and the DC Library have been working on trying to put together for the last year. It's been a long year, but a fruitful one. We've curated a great list of guests over the next couple of months. And what Comictropolis is a chance for the DMV, which is a huge comic-loving area. There's a great fandom here of comic book culture here in the DMV. And it's really a chance to get up close with the people behind the comics. You know, when I was a kid, I wasn't fortunate enough to go to a lot of conventions. You know, the big conventions are in New York and San Diego, where you can really get up close and meet the talent. This is a chance to come to the DC Library in a conversation led by me, and those familiar with my career, after 17 years at the Washington Post, I was the last decade there, I was a comic book culture reporter. So it's a conversation curated by me, hosted by me, and we're just sitting around talking comics with some of the best writers in the biz.
In the last, let's say, like 5-10 years or so, we've seen a lot of the Marvel movies, go online and a lot of series be developed. What has that meant for comics generally actually engaging with the written material and the culture around it? Has it gone up? Has it kind of had its ebbs and flows? What does the adoption of the comic culture look like around DC and around the country?
There's definitely a bigger microscope on comic book culture, and it has everything to do with the impact that's been felt in Hollywood, in theaters over the last 10, 15 years. It's a really big difference when something goes from niche to mainstream. And I think Marvel Studios over the last 15 years has led the way with that. Granted, they've been having some bumps lately, and now you've got DC Studios led by a former Marvel Studios guy, James Gunn. But those two are kind of like the big bang moments that really kind of brought comic book culture into the mainstream. But one thing I really like to emphasize, I do this in the classes I teach at the University of Maryland and American University, and also in my writing, is you can't have all these movies without the comic books. You know, they are directly inspired from that, and they will always be the source material. And you can go on some great adventures, especially, part of what Comictropolis is all about is we really want to get the young kids out there reading and realizing that they can go to their local libraries in D.C. and check out some really cool graphic novels and really kind of, give them a peek at what it's like to put those worlds together.
So, David, you've done a few of these events already. There are still a few left, so if people haven't gotten a chance to see it yet, there's still time. But how were the first couple events? What were some of the big names that you brought in? What were some of the topics that you've talked about? And what has the response been like so far?
The response has been great. The first event, which was hosted by myself and featured Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez. He's a Puerto Rican comic book creator up from New York who created an original Puerto Rican superhero called La Borinqueña. That conversation was great. I really, we've got some big names here from Marvel and DC, but I also wanted to include some creator-owned creators as well to show kids that not only can you strive to work for the big two, but you can actually create your own stuff as well. Last week was a really awesome show. We had Rodney Barnes, who's one of my favorite people ever. Rodney is a former producer of The Boondocks. He was a producer on Winning Time, the show about the Lakers on HBO. And probably one of the coolest things he does is he writes a bundle of Star Wars comics for Marvel and Lucasfilm. And that was a really cool conversation with him. Probably the closest I've ever been where I could actually touch someone who's been in a Lucasfilm meeting. It was a very cool feeling.
If you're someone who is new to comics or new to an event like this, what can a viewer or someone who's engaged with the sessions that you're leading expect to learn?
We want you to learn about the accessibility of comics. You know, a comic book is a quick trip to the library away from being in the palm of your hand and taking you on an adventure you've never been on before, helping you, use your imagination in a way you've never been before, and possibly take you on a journey towards wanting to be a writer or wanting to be an artist. But when you attend Comictropolis, what you're really going to get is a great kind of insider convo. When I was a kid, I used to read a magazine called Wizard Magazine. It was like the Sports Illustrated of comic book culture. It always had the best interviews with the top writers and top artists. And I've really spent the last 20 years of my career trying to duplicate how that magazine made me feel in terms of really getting an inside look. So that's really what Comictropolis is about, especially with some of the big names we have towards the end. People are going to be able to sit down. Probably the biggest name we have is for the final show on July 12th at the MLK Library that features Tom King. The Supergirl movie that's about to come out is completely based off of a graphic novel he wrote called Superman Woman of Tomorrow. And Tom King's a local guy. He lives here in Capitol Hill. And I think that's going to be a real big treat for people in the area.
So, David, we talked about, being a comic culture writer. You talked about being a professor. You also have a very personal connection to comics as well. This subject matter that you're talking about next Saturday, Miles Morales and Me. Can you talk to us a little bit about your connection to Spider-Man, your role in bringing the Boricua suit to life? And you'll have to stand up for our audience as well, because I know what shirt you're wearing, but I'm not sure they do.
Very nice.
The shirt I'm wearing is the famous Spider-Men pointing to each other, which is one of the most famous GIF/memes in the history of the internet. I saw this in Target and absolutely had to own it, and never swiped faster. So it's one of my favorite shirts, and I figured it'd be appropriate since I knew you'd be asking me about Spider-Man. The upcoming chat next weekend at the Southwest Library, it is called Miles and Me. And it is about my relationship with the character of Miles Morales, who, as you guys mentioned, we just talked about how the movies have really kind of put comic book culture on a bigger stage. And the Spider-Verse animated movies from Sony have really done the same thing with the character of Miles Morales, to where you could argue that for a younger generation, he's their Spider-Man just because of how big those movies are. So what the next convo at the Southwest Library is going to be me talking about my experience with writing that character for Marvel. And that came about through me building a history with Marvel over the years, first writing essays for them, and then writing a few comics. But my very first Marvel comic was a Miles Morales adventure. It was called Comunidades. It was a Latino anthology. It was something I'm very proud of writing. Obviously, my big connection with Miles Morales, and something I've written about a lot, is if you're familiar with the background of Miles, he has one African-American parent and one Puerto Rican parent. And that's my background. My father's Puerto Rican. My mother's African-American. I've always grown up not feeling different, but, I don't live in New York, Chicago, Orlando, where there are these gigantic Puerto Rican and black communities all mixed together. So, needless to say, I went a long time without truly feeling like I saw someone like myself represented in media. Miles Morales really represents the first time I truly felt I saw myself in anything, truly both halves. And to be able to get to write a story with him, we created in the story the Boricua suit, which you can see here in this little action figure. This has become really popular with kids. This has become really popular at New York Comic Con. When I was at New York Comic Con this year, obviously huge Puerto Rican population up there. I saw tons of people dressed up in the suit. It's really wild seeing something that was an idea in your head being cosplayed at a really big Comic Con. But Miles is a special character to me. He's someone I'm always going to care about. And my only hope is that my fingers are crossed that the Boricua suit ends up showing up in the last Spider-Verse movie.
Love that. Now, you've written for many different genres. You've been a journalist. You've written for the comic world. What does that writing process look like, writing for comics, and how is it different versus other creative avenues like journalism or movie writing or short film? How is that process different?
It's very, there's similarities and differences. I'd say the biggest similarity is that they're deadlines, and that, whether you're a journalist or whether you're, writing for the Washington Post or writing for the New York Times or the Athletic or writing for Marvel, there's a due date. I once heard a joke that, being a journalist is just like deciding to give yourself homework for the rest of your life. And it's kind of true. So in terms of similarities, I would say that's that. But there also are big differences as well. I'd say the biggest difference is just, especially writing in the fictitious world of fantasy is being able to use your imagination in a really wild way. It's something I've always done my whole life anyway, and to be able to apply that skill to a format that really means a lot to me. I owe everything to comics. Comics are the reason I know how to read. Comics are the reason I wanted to pursue writing, and to be able to be a part of that is a lot of fun.
So, David, when I have you on here, I like to nerd out a little bit, and so we're going to continue that tradition. First, I'm just going to go back to the Wizard magazine thing. I got one in my Christmas stocking one year, and it just so happened to be, and it's so great. I love it so much because Michael Caine was on the cover because Muppet Christmas Carol was coming out. And so it was the issue all about, and Muppet Christmas Carol is still one of my favorite movies of all time. And so the fact that was the first issue I ever owned, I love. Totally off the topic.
But how about the foresight of Michael Caine, the future Alfred of one of the greatest superhero movie franchises of all time, being on there too? So
absolutely correct.
Santa was trying to tell you the future.
That's right. Hey, we were just talking about Spider-Man, and the last time you and I texted, we were talking about Spider Noir. So I have to get your review of what you've watched so far. I'm about 4 episodes in, I think, right now.
Yeah, Spider Noir has been fantastic. It's not supposed to be considered directly pulled from the Spider-Verse, but the fact that they have Nicolas Cage, who voices the character in the animated Spider-Verse movies, also playing this character in live action, it just there's such a geeky je ne sais quoi about his voice and his face being there for this character. Now, are you watching it in color or black and white?
Okay, so I started in color, and I regret that because I feel like the lighting isn't always the same when they go back and forth between shots, because I feel like it was so I've switched to black and white now.
I'm watching in black and white as well. I feel like I'm going to initially watch the first binge in black and white, and then watch a few episodes in color. But I just from the comic books to the way he's presented in black and white in the animated movies, for me it just feels like a more authentic way to watch in black and white. But Nicolas Cage, he's such a geek at heart, and he's such a huge fan of the culture. I mean, here's a guy who was almost Superman under Tim Burton, played Ghost Rider. He's literally a Coppola, but changed his name to Cage because Luke Cage was one of his favorite heroes. And he's also the actor my son Nicholas is named after, because my wife, even though she grew up in the Dominican Republic, loves Nicolas Cage. Wow. And always said if she had a boy, she'd name him Nicholas. So thanks, Nick.
That's incredible. I think that is so wholesome. Now, let me ask you this. It seems that these characters, superheroes from comics, have really lasted the test of time. They have generations upon generations from these comics. What do you think it is about these characters or just comics in general that have led to Spider-Man and others being just so intertwined in pop culture?
Comics are eternal. And one thing that has happened now that, they've become a part of cinema is, people keep saying, oh, superhero fatigue, when's it going to end?
Right.
Country club critics that can't stand this stuff. There's just like there's always going to be horror, just like there's always going to be romance, just like there's always going to be drama, just like there's always going to be mystery, there's always going to be comics and superheroes. They are our modern myths, and they are just, obviously I'm extremely biased, but, this is a genre that gets rediscovered by new generations every year, adapted in multiple platforms, whether it be movies, television, animation. It's just a wonderful culture that I don't think is going anywhere.
And what do readers get from actually reading and engaging tangibly with the comics versus using other medium or short films or movies? What can they gain from sitting down and engaging with the comics themselves?
It's funny. I kind of go through this as a professor at the university level, because I'll have students that are so knowledgeable, because my classes are primarily about superheroes in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And these kids will be so, 20-somethings, so knowledgeable about the MCU, about, the DCU, James Gunn, Kevin Feige. But a lot of times they're not reading the comics. So you have this whole generation now of young kids that have grown up just with the movies. But it's actually kind of cool when they kind of discover the books that have inspired all of this stuff. It's one of those things where, when you read the books, it's almost like you're in on a really cool secret. And for a lot of people, when they go to watch the Supergirl movie, a lot of people have already read the Supergirl comic and likely have an idea how that movie's going to turn out. You're really getting a firsthand look at what Hollywood is thumbing through when they're looking for their next big hit.
David, we got to wrap things up, but it wouldn't be the producer and me if I didn't take it full circle. Two quick things. One, we just talked about the NBA Finals, and you got a chance to sit down with the legend Spike Lee himself. So, who do you got?
Wow.
Who do you got in this series?
I actually rooted for the Knicks a lot as a kid because of Patrick Ewing, a Georgetown guy. They're a tough team. I think it would just be very poetic and beautiful for the city of New York, which is a fantastic city, if the Knicks won. My hope is the Knicks get this one. This is the perfect time for them to get it. And then Wemby will probably win 5 more because he's going to grow another 6 inches.
Yeah, perfect. Well, right now it's 52-51, 2 minutes left in the second quarter. And finally, David, if people want to follow you for more, or if they want to come see you at the DC Library Comictropolis series, how can they do it?
They can hit me up on Instagram. I'm David Betancourt Writes.
Excellent. David, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday night, spending some time with us. Have a great weekend. I'll be in touch when I finish Spider Noir and let you know what I think.
Same here. Take care, guys.
All right. Take it easy. Tony P., I love chatting.